When I saw my first lynching, I became a political activist. I just knew that it was necessary to do something to change things.
When was the first time you heard about Paul Robeson?
Well, I had known about him in the South. He was a hero. And I came here, and the Nicholas brothers were friendly with him. They had known him in Europe, and they knew him when he came out here for concerts, etc. In those days, people in show business mingled with each other. There was a close bond between all the people who worked on the stage and in movies. And so it was a natural thing. They preferred the company of each other.
Mm-hmm. So now, was Paul was considered I'm assuming he was considered a high-class performer, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Concert.
What was the reaction, I mean, from your perception, what did the showbiz folks think of his political activity?
Well, some of them admired it. There were a few of them who joined him. Very few. But I remember June Richmond, who was a great singer, who later went to Europe, Rex Ingram, Canada Lee, people in that category, all admired him very much and would sit around after concerts and discuss all the problems of the day, and there were many.
Let's say, so when was the first time you actually met him?
I think I first met him when he was playing Othello, and went backstage, and from then on we became friends.
Now, you said that there were many problems. They used to talk about the political problems of the day.
Right.
And there were many. What were some of the things?
Some of the problems were there was a lady by the name of Charlotta Bass who owned the California Eagle. And she was in financial trouble, always having to get her paper out of the press, paying for it each week. And there were two of us, Dorothy Dandridge, my sister-in-law.
Okay. We're playing again. Freeze. Paul.
Quiet, please.
Set. And then we got the bird, but we'll live with it.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so some of the issues of the day were
having Mrs. Charlotta Bass stay in business. And Dorothy Dandridge, Jean Soroti, and Geri Branton used to get her paper out of hock each week, and it ran about $900 each week, and we would split the money and pay it to the press so that we could get her paper out. And it was essential. Her paper directed us to jobs, real estate, businesses, etc., and all the political happenings, who was running, what chances we had, etc., etc. There were very few elected officials, and that was our only means of advertising and having people run for office.
Mm-hmm. Did they do interviews with Paul when he came out?
Always.
What's all
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Get some water.
But she admired Paul, and he would do big benefits for her paper. We had one benefit over at Wrigley Field, and he crowded that place. He drew more people than the president.
Was Was he a big hero primarily to the black when he first got here? This is what, in the 40s, right?
Right.
Okay. Was he a big hero to just the black community, or was he a well-known?
No,
to
he was respected and admired by every segment of society. And it was not until the FBI started coming around that threatened people's jobs, and they wouldn't go to a concert. I remember once Hedda Hopper, who was a vicious columnist, wrote that anyone who would go to a Paul Robeson concert, in those days he would sing at the Hollywood Bowl and everywhere, and she said anyone who would go to a Paul Robeson concert was a communist if they applauded.
And this was in the 40s?
Yes.
Well, this must have been during the Cold War, I guess, right?
It was the beginning. And we had John Garfield and a lot of wonderful people who would go to a concert. And we had a place called the Actors Lab, and they used the Stanislavski movement and method. And Anthony Quinn was one of the big stars, etc. And in order to keep the school running, we gave a big benefit and had closed off the streets, and they had dancing in the streets. And Anthony Quinn and a few other actors danced with Dorothy Dandridge. And Hedda Hopper had this integration just couldn't go on. So she put the Actors Lab on a list, and that it was communist-inspired and so on because of the method that they used teaching acting. So a lot of people dropped out of school. Marilyn Monroe was one of the actors attending. And the man who played Sam Slade also. And there were several women who were marvelous actresses. And she castigated them for going to the Actors Lab.
So did they, but Paul, I'm assuming, supported
would come and do a benefit or support them in any way that he could.
All right. Give me a sense of how Paul related to people one-to-one. I mean, you knew him personally, so...
Well, Paul, I'm sorry you didn't have the experience, would come into a room with 300 people, and they would probably murder you because they would tell you he was talking just to them, each one. And he had that way of communicating, that he was just talking to you, and you were sure of it.
Now, he was an actor, so he had a certain skill, right?
Right, but he was naturally charismatic.
How much political work did he do out here? I mean, was he...
Well, in supporting the various causes and benefits and committees, and doing benefits for Charlotta Bass over at Wrigley Field, helping the Actors Lab. We had a committee then called the Hollywood Democratic Committee, and all the big actors.
Oh, okay, if you could start over, please. I'm sorry. You could start mentioning some of the things, all the things that he did.
All the benefits, all the committees, any liberal committee that was going to help people get jobs. He did a lot to help Roosevelt, who managed his own campaign in those days. Helen Hagan Douglas, people like that. he was just good about that. He was good about talking to the various committees and helping us direct our efforts.
Now, back east, people are pretty much familiar with, the progressive community.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like out here, let's say, during the 40s?
It was skimpy, not too skimpy. Not too many people were jumping on the bandwagon. We had the vicious pre-McCarthy era Jack Tenney Committee, and they used to engage anyone that they considered too left-wing, call them before the committee and give them a bad time and threaten them.
So how did that affect the progressive community out here?
It scared them to death. And they formed the blacklist. Actors couldn't work. And Canada Lee was absolutely distraught.
Now, did Paul ever talk about his thoughts about being in the movies out here?
Oh, yes.
What did he say?
Yeah. Well, first of all, he resented the Uncle Tom roles. And he always tried to uplift and upgrade the pictures and the parts. But for everyone. He hated the business of dialect and maids and butlers and buffoons. And there was some very nice people in the community. For instance, Ben Carter, who was in Mantan Moreland, was always a buffoon. And he'd get scared and his hair would stand up straight, and he was an Uncle Tom. Yet, on the other hand, he was a great Shakespearean actor. Very, very intelligent and politically motivated. For instance, we got through an ordinance that said if you refuse to serve a black person in a restaurant, that you'd have to pay $100. So we were lucky enough to have a limousine, a stretched Chrysler, that Harold and Fayard traveled from place to place in. They had a chauffeur and so on. So Ben Carter would come to my house, and we'd go out in Watts and pick up a lot of black children and put them in our Chrysler, and we could carry about 11 kids. So we would go out to a restaurant that was close to the studios that we knew wouldn't serve black people, and I would go in and get a table. And then after I'd get the table, we'd go out, and Ben would come in with all these children and sit around the restaurant. And, of course, we wouldn't be served. And they'd come to me and say, what a shame that you do something like this. You're taking advantage. And so, fine, we'd say, you'd better serve us. Do you know about the new ordinance? Well, I don't care about the new ordinance. So Monday morning, we would go downtown and go to court, and everybody would get a $100. Everybody who had been refused service. So, after doing that for 3 or 4 weekends, the business started to say that they would then serve us, and they'd give us hamburgers and Cokes, but give them to us free. Well, they couldn't afford it after a time. Imagine 11 people, $1,100 on Monday. They didn't like that so much. So we would finish with that one, then we would go to the drive-ins and do the same thing. And then they'd pay more money out. So finally they decided to drop the ban. So that's how we got integration into the restaurants.
Did I'm curious that when there's two periods. There's the period before the Cold War when Paul came out, and that was basically to do some work, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, afterwards, though, when they banned his concert career and took away his passport,
Mm-hmm.
Was he able to get any concerts in black churches here? I mean, any?
Yes, only the churches on Central Avenue in Vermont and Figueroa, mainly storefront churches. So he would do 3 shows in an evening, and you'd have people standing around the corner to get in. It was delightful. He was delighted.
Well, he got a lot of his support was the folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
If you could say that for me, it would help.
A few people would, from Beverly Hills and other places, if they knew he was singing, he would attract the people. They didn't care the politics. They wanted to hear him sing. And they especially, the people who'd come out and stand around the corner, loved to have him read from Langston Hughes. He used to read the poems of Mr. Jesse B. Simple. And he did a wonderful job of doing that. But they were things that the people could associate with. Jesse B. Simple lived in a rooming house, and he hated his landlord, and he had to scramble up the window in order to get in or get out, because he owed rent, had no job. So Paul would make that so real for people. And that was the charm of those concerts.
Did you, when he was going through that, I mean, I know that he performed well, but did you get a sense that it had an effect on him? I mean, all that pressure and all that?
He was delighted when he was performing.
No, I mean, but afterwards.
Afterwards, no, because he was appreciated. Any actor who is appreciated is a happy actor or a happy person.
But he didn't express any anger?
Not until later. No. Later on, it hadn't taken hold, actually, and it was such a shock.
What was?
Yeah, all of a sudden these concert halls were taken away. But his pianist continued to accompany him, and he did well.
So when did he begin to show effect of the FBI? I mean, all right, first of all, tell me the kind of harassment that he experienced. How did they harass him?
The FBI followed him, and they absolutely nixed every idea that he would go to a concert hall. That was out. O-U-T. But he sang for them anyway. I recall when he was very hurt when people went around to try and get statements from various black actors. And they went to Lena Horne. Of course, she refused. He'd been a good a mentor for her. And even though pressured with being on a blacklist, she still refused. Lena is intelligent and has a great deal of courage. And she just wouldn't do it. But they did get a statement from Jackie Robinson. And after Jackie made this statement, Paul said, "Well, I understand, Jackie, and you must understand, Jackie, and don't be bitter. Jackie can only play on a baseball field, Paul Robeson can go and sing to the Eskimos, and they will understand. So I'm in a fortunate situation. So we still have to fight to educate the system so that they don't act in such an ignorant way. And that was his reply.
Did you see him? You saw him in Othello in England, right?
Yes, and here.
What did you think?
Well, I loved everything he did, so I'm not a good judge. He was beautiful. His robes, everything. His stance. Now, severe Shakespearean actors had some criticism about how he recited Shakespeare. But he only made it sensible to me, because it's very difficult to understand the language of Shakespeare. But he made it simple and right and good. The jealousy angle.
Do you think that the things that he did, in the long run, do you think they made any impact in American life?
Oh, yes.
If you could say that for me.
The things that he did made a terrific impact on life in America and giving people another consciousness, raising people's consciousness about what they were doing for them, to themselves and to America. Absolutely.
If knowing what you know now, and seeing what's happened, if he were alive today, what advice would you give him? In other words, do you think that there's something that he could have done? I mean, he paid a price in a lot of ways.
Of course he did.
And
finally, that great nervous system just broke down. It was too much. Peekskill was a terrible experience. You see, we must remember, Paul was not accustomed to the South. And somebody like me could bring that experience to him. He knew fascism in Europe and here and in New York, but he didn't know the raw horror of racism in the South. And that was totally different. New Yorkers and people, as we call them, up north, and in St. Louis and Chicago, had a different view. They had the anatomy of integration. But that's all it was. It wasn't real.
So what was it about the South you don't think he understood?
He didn't understand lynching, and he didn't understand the kind of integration that the Southerners had, that if a white man had his eye on a special black woman, or a Negro woman as we called them then, he could get lynched.
That if a white person had an eye on a Negro woman,
yes,
who could get lynched? The white person?
If a black man looked at a black woman who a white man admired, he was sure marked to be lynched. And the feeling was there. That feeling of meanness.
Well, he didn't know.
He didn't know that.
Because Paul ran around with a lot of white women sometimes.
He didn't run around with them. They ran around with him or ran after him.
That's a good point.
Slight difference.
Right, that's true. That's true. So when was the last time you saw him?
Oh, gosh.
Must have been
Came back, pardon?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
He came back from England once, last time. And, he came out here once. And Nat Cole was a great admirer of his.
Who?
Nat King Cole. And Nat heard that Paul was here, and he said, Geri, we gotta get him over to the house. So that night we went over. Nat came in and saw him, was just delighted. And the first thing Paul said to him was, Nat, I gotta show you something. He says, you know, we don't need white keys to play spirituals. We can play spirituals completely with black keys.
Okay, I want you to say it again, but let's wait for the plane. That's interesting. Roll. Quiet, please. Okay. If you could say that again, Nat King Cole.
Nat King Cole admired him and had for a long time, since Chicago. But he says, Nat, we can play spirituals, do spirituals, without white keys. We can use only black keys. So he says, come over to the piano. So Nat says, Paul, I don't have to go to the piano. I can do it in my head. He says, and you're absolutely right. Every one of the spirituals that I know can be done solely with black keys. And he says, I'm going to try it someday. He says, but right now, I can hear it.
You know, I wanted to know, in the in the activist community that you lived in that community, right? Not physically, but you were part of the.
Of course.
Now, was there a division between? Hold it. Sorry. Okay, roll. Yeah. Tell me about how many people were like really committed activists. I mean, and were they all black or were they all white, or did you the black and white work?
A combination of black and white. There were some very progressive black people, and very, very fine white people.
Cut. Pause. Okay, let's roll. Yeah, okay, so we're talking about the progressive community when Paul would come out. I mean, you're saying it was a combination? Okay.
Cut. I lost.
Okay. You rolling?
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Nat Cole was one of the few black people who had the courage to greet Paul Robeson with open arms. And maybe they inspired each other. I'd like to think that. Nat was one of the very few actors who employed a black lawyer. I'm sure that Paul encouraged him in that direction.
So, I mean, I don't know if you could, in terms of numbers, but...
In terms of numbers, that isn't difficult. Because
Okay, so in terms of numbers?
In terms of numbers, there were very few. I'd like to call on my husband about, Leo, would you say there were about 50?
I can't tell you about the numbers, but the fact of the matter was that a lot of the so-called black activists shied away from Paul Robeson because of the taint of communism.
Let's cut for a second. Okay, so the question I asked you before was, do you think that Paul Robeson being out here, did he ever talk to you about his disappointment with Hollywood?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, you can do that. Just looking at it. If you want some water.
Of course, he understood it. And he was friendly with a lot of producers and other people. He was more knowledgeable than they were about why they did it. He understood their motivations. It was money.
Well, did he express? Did he ever express any personal disappointment to you?
Well, but it was with great knowledge of what was happening. But he always understood the system. He said, always attack the system. Don't attack individuals. They're victims.
What was the system like for black actors out here during that time?
It was dreadful.
Like, can you give me some examples?
That you, a lady had to be a maid, and a man had to be a butler, or an Uncle Tom, or a step and fetcher, or a white man would come on the scene and he'd run, or his hair would stand on end. It was dreadful. Hattie McDaniel was a loving, motherly kind of person.
And what about...
It carries on today.
What about off stage? In other words, when... what kind of living conditions did actors have? I mean, was it segregated living?
Of course. They all gathered on Central Avenue. After they finished work, Herb Jeffries, Lena Horne, everybody would come to our after-hour spots on Central Avenue. It was a wonderful time too. Art Tatum, he loved talking to Paul. He was a militant. He told me one time that he thought that it would be good to have a black Ku Klux Klan, that all the people who would turn against Paul, that you ought to take them out and beat them. Don't kill them, but beat them.
So in the long run, do you think that Paul had an effect on Hollywood?
Paul had an effect anywhere. That voice, he used to say, "You think my voice is deep and wonderful," he says, "but you should have heard my father. His voice came from his feet, and he really did bass. He was wonderful." He admired his father very much.
Well, what kind of an effect do you think Paul Robeson had on Hollywood?
What kind of an effect? He had the effect that they knew that he would only be dignified, that they wouldn't approach him with any Uncle Tom business. They certainly respected that. And I think he prepared them for what would come later, that there were other people who had courage and who wouldn't do it.
Okay, hold on for a second. Pause. Yeah.
He told me, he used to explain people to me when he thought that I was a little bitter. He said, "Geri, people are like sausages." He says, "and if you go to Europe, you will find sausages of all kinds." He said, "but it's not the skin, because you can find white sausage, red, black, fantastic. But the difference is the stuffing. And so with people, we have to stuff them with the right education. And that's what makes it different.
Can't beat that.
Right.
Yeah. Any other things that he used to say that you remember? I'm sure there are probably.
Like that,
Yeah.
about people. He had great hope for people. I didn't.
You didn't.
No, I thought people were evil, and that there were more evil people than good people.
And his reaction to that was?
He said, no, that's not true. Every man has within him the ability to be good. And that's what we have to work for. If there's a centimeter of good, try to embellish that and encourage that. So I said, well, why are there so many mean acts and they get away with it? Whole juries. He said, yes, but we still have to work on them.
Do you, I asked you this before off camera, but how well did you know Essie?
I didn't know her well at all. She stayed very much in the background. And when she'd come out here, she would mingle with a few women, and she had a few friends, and that was it.
What did you think of her?
I think she was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and a handsome-looking woman. And she was dominating, and rather aggressive. And I think she had a certain color prejudice. She would tell very dark-skinned actresses, you shouldn't wear light colors, you should wear dark colors.
Roll sound.
Roll it, quiet please.
Camera.
In the early days, you want to know about...
Oh.
Oh.
Okay, let's go. Roll. Okay, you can tell that Nehru incident.
Oh, yeah. He was very friendly with Nehru in the early days. In the African, pre-African days, he was also very friendly with the people from Kenya. And Nehru used to come to those meetings. He had been in jail for a long time, and he came out and he spent a lot of time with Robeson. And later, when Nehru gained prominence in India, he came here to visit. The Indian community, and he called Paul and asked him to accompany him. And Nehru had been doing some ugly things to the socialists in India. And so Paul told him, I'm sorry, I can't accompany you because your hands are now too bloody. In later years, he rather regretted that because he said that if he had gone with Nehru, maybe he could have turned him another way. But he had another friend, and I cannot think of his name, but he was crotchety and tough. And he used to meet American reporters. He used to then say, say to them, I am better at sophistry than you are, so don't bother me with that. You don't even know the meaning. Get out of my way. And I am sorry that I can't think of his name, but I admired him very much. So did Paul.
Most people think of Paul as a speech-giving, singing person. Was there a humorous? Was he, when he was relaxed? What kind of person was he?
Oh yes, when he interpreted Langston Hughes, there was no greater humorist in the world. Nobody can interpret Langston the way that Paul did. Mr. Just Be Simple. That was an alter ego of his. He loved that character.
When he wasn't performing, when he was just sitting around relaxing, did he joke a lot?
Oh yes. He was very pleasant, and his laugh was so melodious and deep felt. And he didn't, as an actor, he didn't try to hog the stage in normal conversation. He was very relaxed.
Yeah, everybody says that his generosity of spirit was one of his big qualities.
That's right. Yeah.
One of the car accidents happened out here. Do you know about that?
No, I don't recall
One of the
that.
sabotage of his car. He wasn't in it, but
Yes.
it happened out here.
Yes.
I just wondered if you
She
know
said
about
no.
No, I didn't know about it.
Yeah, okay.
And I knew his bodyguards. I didn't know that.
His bodyguards were from out here?
Mm-hmm.
Were they part of they were political people?
Mm-hmm.
Was there how real do you think the danger was of him being hurt or shot at or insulted or?
I don't trust these people.
Did Paul? Was
And
open?
he didn't either.
He didn't.
No. They would change cars often. They were very careful about that.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to say about Paul before we?
Another thing, he was here in '65, just before he entered Gracie Square Hospital.
Uh-huh.
Did you notice a big difference? Did you notice the depression, or could you talk about that at all?
No. He did. He carried on very well. Whenever he was engaged, that was it. Everything else went out the window.
Is there anything else you want to say, Jenny? No,
I can't think of anything. I'm sure I'll think of it afterwards,
You leave,
and I
yeah.
want Leo to tell you.
Okay.
He's
Let's-
better than I am.
I'm not.
Let's cut